Hi, so I pre-ordered this vibe coding book and I got it last week. And I want to do a quick book review because I read it cover to cover over the weekend. And I just wanted to quickly share my impressions of the book. So this is the book Beyond Vibe Coding from Coder to AI Era Developer. The author is Adi Osmani. And he has, by the way, this great Substack where he's been writing really in-depth, long-form essays about AI-assisted coding and vibe coding. And before that, he was doing a lot of writing on web development as well. So great author, but I'll get to the point. I would rate this about 2.5, 3 stars out of 5. For me, it was not a very satisfying read, and I'll get into why. I think the majority of the reason I didn't like this book is simply because that it was a book, and to publish a book like this with O'Reilly undoubtedly takes months or at least a year, even if they accelerate it. And just having such a long publishing cycle alone means that by the time the book is out, it is already out of date. So this is not so much a critique of the author, it is more a critique of the format and the time cycle it takes to publish in this format. And you can see some examples of this in the book. So there are a couple of really large omissions that really kind of spoiled the experience of this book, for me at least. The largest omission by far is that the book doesn't talk about all these command line agents like Claude Code, Codex CLI, and so on. And they have completely changed how programmers approach AI assisted programming. If you're a heavy user of these CLI agents, you can go weeks without even opening an IDE. And they are a step change going from the entire VS Code plus GitHub Copilot or Cursor slash Windsurf way of working to this new way of working with Claude Code and Codex and so on. It is a big change. And the book doesn't cover that really. It covers a little bit because there's a chapter on asynchronous agents like Jules or the web version of Codex or Devon, but that is still a very different experience than the CLI agents. Yeah, actually, you can pull up the table of contents on Amazon. So this chapter 10, talks about background coding agents, but not about all these CLI agents. The other big omission, in my opinion, was that there's no mention of this predominant way of working with CLI agents, which is spec-driven or plan-driven development. Claude Code and most of the other coding agents, they even have a separate plan mode that is different from execution mode when it's actually writing code. So he covers it very tangentially in the chapter on prompt engineering, but this chapter is more about just the basics of prompting, what makes a good prompt, how you have to be specific, how you have to specify roles and give enough context in the prompt and so on. But it doesn't really talk about separating these two phases of working with a CLI agent, where phase one is working on a plan, coming up with a detailed plan, and then phase two is setting off the agent to execute on that plan. And I think this all goes back to who is this book for, really? If you are a developer who has never actually done AI assisted coding or vibe coding, or maybe they are just starting to do it, then this book will give you some good general ways to approach it. However, if like me, you're kind of very online, you've used these tools a lot, you follow all the thought leaders on X and watch all the AI coding podcasts, Latent Space and all that stuff, and you're really in the thick of it, you use these tools day in, day out, then unfortunately this book is going to seem a bit stale. So in my mind, the biggest positive of this book is that it offers a bunch of good advice, general purpose advice that is tool agnostic for how developers should approach AI assisted programming. What are the things that are unique to human developers versus what should get offloaded to the tools? And you can see this in the table of contents. For example, he talks a lot about the 70% problem, where the tool can give you 70 to 80% of what you want, and then you have to use your human expertise to close the gap and take it all the way to completion. How you should approach reviewing AI generated code, how you should be debugging AI generated code, and so on. So if you're someone who's just getting into AI assisted coding, there's some good tool agnostic general purpose advice that applies regardless of what tool you're using. So that is the biggest positive of this book. By the way, there's another book by Steve Yegi, also on this topic of vibe coding, that's coming out next month in October. Yeah, that's the one. That's the book Steve Yegi co-authored with Gene Kim. And I've ordered that as well, so maybe I'll do a review of that too when it comes out. But overall, yeah, about 2.5-ish stars out of 5. Some good general purpose advice, but by the very nature of being a book, I think it is a bit out of date already and maybe not specific enough or sharp enough with the latest tools if you're already a developer who's been in this space. All right, hope that helps. Thanks.